I don't. We will finish it today. Okay. So, even before well, let me rephrase that. While Washington is still president, we see these two sides of the political spectrum starting to form. Jefferson and Hamilton are of opposite opinions on almost everything. And their differences will eventually coalesce into the first two political parties. And because Washington sees this happening in his own cabinet, that is why it is included in his farewell address. He was like, we can't, no, stop now. We need to all get on the same page for what's good for the country. But, people will have differences of opinion. So the first political party system, we have the Federalists and the Republicans, sometimes known as the Democratic Republicans. It's different from the Republican Party of Lincoln, very different from the Republican Party of today. But these were our first two parties and who they looked to for leadership, Hamilton and Jefferson. We're going to take a look at this little video real quick, and then we'll come back to our...
This is my comeback. Start yours at purdueglobal.edu.
Just to kind of set the stage here, this is a little segment from a series on John Adams, and it is Jefferson and Hamilton kind of airing out some differences here.
That's right, Philadelphia, much changed. More change than I could imagine, Mr. Hamilton. Not the city itself. All cities swallow up to fruits away. That's no surprise to me, that's why I am one. But I've been, as you know, in revolutionary France, where the streets are filled with the songs of liberty and brotherhood and the overthrow of ancient tyrannies of Europe, and to return from there to this cradle of revolution and find the dinner table chat is all of money and banks and authority.
That's Jefferson speaking.
Welcome surprise. Welcome, perhaps, but necessary.
That's Hamilton.
I must admit, Miss Anderson, I brought a little uncertain as to the purpose of the Treasury Department. No doubt its function will reveal itself to me in good time. The future prosperity for this nation rests chiefly in trade. Trade depends, among other things, on the willingness of other nations to lend us money. And how would you propose to establish international credit? Our first step would be to
apply his national bank idea to Jefferson, but Jefferson, as we know, not a big fan. I'm gonna reload this, I don't like that view of the slideshow. Here we go. So, on one side of the party system, you have the Federalists. Some of the feelings of the Federalists, they favor an idea of what we would call national politics, meaning that the nation comes before the states. The nation of the United States, the government in the capital, eventually Washington D.C., at that time it was Philadelphia, but the federal government would be more powerful than any of the state governments. So looking at national politics, the nation before the states, the national government being where most of the power of government lies, not in the states. Hamilton, we know from yesterday, because he is proposing the national bank, the BFAT plan, he is considered a loose constructionist as far as interpreting the Constitution. Federalist or loose constructionist, because if you interpret the Constitution loosely, you can do more things. You don't have to just follow word for word what it says the government can only do in the Constitution. They believe that the focus of the country and the future of the United States lies in commerce and manufacturing, not agriculture. Generally, the Federalists appeal to urban, so the people that live in the cities that work in commerce and manufacturing. So we're looking at really the Northeast. And also, it kind of goes, since we're looking at commerce and manufacturing, we're looking at business owners, bankers, merchants. If they had to pick a country as to be our best friend and who we ought to ally with, that would be the British. Because the British, even though we just fought a war with them and are going to fight another war with them, will always be our #1 trading partner in early American history. And they were against helping the French in the French Revolution. And the power base of the Federalists, again, like I said earlier, is in the northeast of the United States. Jefferson. He is going to be head of the Democratic Republicans. And sometimes it's just the Republicans, but Democratic Republicans is a better description. That's what he would call himself. And it's really just the opposite. Instead of looking at national politics or national policies, he thinks states ought to make the decisions and states' rights is more important. State governments and local governments ought to be the main authority in one's life. Strict constructionism, you can't do it unless it's specifically mentioned in the Constitution. So no national bank. Agriculture ought to be the foundation of the American nation, now and going forward. This appeals mostly to rural people and rural interests, particularly small farmers, but also very wealthy plantation owners. Jefferson is very anti-British, pro-French, in support of the French and the French Revolution, and most of the support for the Democrat Republicans come from the frontier west and in the south. So these are the original political parties in the United States. Obviously our party system looks very different now, and this is something we'll kind of keep score with throughout the course, how the parties change over time. obviously the Federalists die out, but they turn into a different group with a different name. And we'll kind of track that throughout the course. So, even though we have this party system and people look to Hamilton as a leader and Jefferson as a leader, Hamilton will not run for president. Who we will see running for president after George Washington says, I ain't going for a third term, are these two guys. You got Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, and John Adams will represent the Federalist Party. John Adams was Washington's vice president. And of course Jefferson was at first Secretary of State, but then he resigns. And Adams and Jefferson were at one point, before all of this, very good friends. They were the two big allies there in that Second Continental Congress, where Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, but it was really John Adams that voiced the Declaration of Independence, saying, let's do this. So they are on good terms initially, and then they turn into like the biggest enemies ever. So you can see how it goes. The states in green are supporting the Democratic Republican candidate Jefferson. Purple, those states went to Adams. And you'll notice this, like North Carolina, but also Virginia. In the Electoral College, most all states are a winner-take-all system, right? Whatever candidate wins the popular vote in that state, they get all the electoral votes. It used to not always be winner-take-all. A lot of states, and 2 states still do it now, Nebraska is the largest of them, but they divide up their electoral votes by congressional district. So that is why you have North Carolina, 11 votes going to Jefferson and 1 vote going to Adams. Okay? Now North Carolina is winner take all. Whoever wins North Carolina in the popular vote gets all the electoral votes. So you can see it is very close. But Adams does win by a slim margin, and he is the president. So you have Adams, President Jefferson is going to be the vice president, because that's how it used to be before the 12th Amendment. It's the 12th Amendment, right? The winner in the Electoral College, which of course is Adams, gets to be the president. Whoever gets the second most votes in the Electoral College becomes the vice president. So we got Adams and Jefferson. This is not a good system. It's not a good system for a couple of reasons, but obviously if you have people of opposing points of view, that could be a thorny White House. Several things that happen while Adams is president. The first one that we'll discuss becomes known as the Quasi War. And this is an undeclared naval conflict between us and France. And we got a short little video that we're going to look at real quick. Notice the dates. It lasts a couple of years here. Oopsie. Let's go back to that. The Quasi War.
Businesses need 5G solutions today. That's why they choose T-Mobile for Business. Today we're looking at the Quasi War. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bell Ringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, don't forget to check out dailybellringer.com for resources that go
several different names: the Undeclared War with France, the Pirate Wars, or the Half War. Most of the fighting took place at sea in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Caribbean. Although the Americans and French had been allies during the American Revolution, the relationship had been strained in the years since the end of the American Revolution. In February of 1778, the United States and France signed the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which recognized the United States as an independent nation. It encouraged trade between France and America and created a military alliance against Great Britain. Furthermore, the United States agreed to provide protection to French colonies in the Caribbean. The relationship between the two really began to be strained in the early 1790s as the French began to enter into a series of wars with other European powers in the wake of the French Revolution. The British and Dutch were threats to many of France's Caribbean colonies. President George Washington at the time was adamant that the United States would remain neutral in these conflicts. The French even sent ambassadors to America to ask for aid, and Washington refused, and instead, America signed the Jay Treaty in 1794 with Britain, which settled some remaining issues from the American Revolution and established friendly diplomacy and trade between America and Britain. This treaty angered France, and they retaliated by capturing several American trade ships trading with the British. In response, Congress voted to start building up naval forces and building several new warships, such as the USS Congress, USS President, and USS General Greene, which USS is simply short for United States Ship. In 1797, John Adams became the second president of the United States and immediately had to deal with these foreign relation problems. Adams sent diplomats to France in July of 1797 to attempt to settle disputes between the two nations. Before the diplomats could even meet with French officials, they were approached by representatives of the French foreign minister that demanded the Americans pay them a bribe, as well as give them a loan and formally apologize to them for what was happening. Of course, the American diplomats were insulted and outraged and returned to the United States without even meeting with French officials. President Adams then went to Congress to ask that they take measures to defend the United States from France. Congress was a little unsure about what was going on, and they asked Adams to give them the official reports of what had happened in France with the diplomats. Adams did share the reports, but crossed out the French representatives' names and replaced them with X, Y, and Z, so the entire incident became known as the XYZ affair. Anger over the entire incident and fear of a possible French invasion of America led to the United States building up more military forces. Also, John Adams called 66-year-old George Washington out of retirement and gave him power as commander-in-chief once again. Washington was honestly too old at this point to effectively organize or raise an army, so much of that responsibility fell to Washington's close aide, Alexander Hamilton. Although the United States was building up military strength, as I mentioned, they never actually declared war on France. And actually, there were really only two major engagements between the French and Americans, and both of those took place at sea. As 1800 approached, Napoleon Bonaparte had become the new leader of France. And to President John Adams' surprise, Napoleon was willing to settle issues between the United States and France. On November 9th, 1800, they signed the Treaty of Morte-Fontana, which officially ended the Quasi War and ended the 1778 Treaty of Alliances. But a side note here, there was an ulterior motive Napoleon had for signing the treaty. The very next day, on November 10th, 1800, Napoleon signed the secret Treaty of Saint-Ildefonso, which gave the French control of the Louisiana Territory. Napoleon had ambitions of conquering the North American continent, and continuing hostilities in the Quasi War would have interfered with those plans. But the circumstances of the French then selling the Louisiana Territory to the United States a few years later in the Louisiana Purchase is a story for another video. So,
Alright, and of course we'll talk about all of that with the whole Louisiana thing. But the Quasi-War, getting back to this, the French are attacking American ships because the French are mad at us for trading with England and the Jay's Treaty saying that England is our best friend, #1 trading partner. France and England are at war against each other as part of the ongoing French Revolution. France is at war with the whole continent of Europe, for crying out loud, particularly Great Britain. And that initial treaty we signed with France during our American Revolution, saying that we have a military alliance, France was like, you're supposed to be helping us. You should be fighting the British on behalf of France. And we're like, nah, we're staying out of it. And that made them mad. Us trading with Britain made them mad. They were attacking our ships. And of course, the British were attacking us too because we were trading with France, right? Which led us to the whole Jays Treaty to begin with. So by us declaring this neutrality, Washington making that neutrality proclamation in the French Revolution, we are getting really attacked from both sides out in the Atlantic trying to do trade with Europe. So the XYZ affair is part of this Quasi war, as the video explains. And this is what becomes a kind of a big deal in the American public. So, of course, the Quasi-war, we start with this, right? This is what kind of kicks off this Quasi-war with France. They are attacking American ships. I'm clicking, but it's not clicking. What is happening? Here we go. Like the video said, John Adams will send a few ambassadors to France to, talk this out. And whenever our guys show up to France, 3 French diplomats, before our guys are allowed to meet with any officials of the French government that have any power to do anything, these 3 French people, they ask for bribes up to like $100,000. And they want promises and assurances that our diplomats were not willing to give. So the French want some pocket money here. What comes out of this XYZ affair, our diplomats come home and report to Adams about what happened, and it really infuriates the American public. This becomes the motto of the day: millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Tribute is like payment for protection back in those days, right? You pay the bully not to beat you up. That's tribute. So we will spend millions of dollars to build up American defenses, particularly the Navy, because that's where all the trouble's happening. But we will not spend 1 cent to buy protection. And that was what was assumed that these French agents wanted. So, millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. And Adams does go about building up the American Navy. Well, there it goes. Adams starts plans to build up the U.S. Navy, and he does. And the next president, Jefferson, will use that Navy very effectively. Even though he criticized this at the time, because we were, of course, doing this perhaps with the intentions of using this Navy against France, since they were the ones that were messing with us and insulting us. And Jefferson was very pro-France. He poo-pooed this idea of having to build up the Navy. But he will use that Navy for something else later on. Next with Adams, and this is what makes Adams a one-term president. The Alien and Sedition Acts. So, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and anytime you see acts, of course that's a law passed by our Congress. And the Federalists, they were worried about negative press. They wanted to silence their opponents, and they wanted to make it harder for immigrants become voters because immigrant voters, they were noticing, or leaning toward the Democratic Republican Party. So the Federalists, and of course John Adams is a Federalist, and you have Federalists controlling Congress. They pass a series of laws that really become known as a group as the Alien and Sedition Act. It starts with the Nationalization Act. So it sets the time limit on becoming a U.S. citizen with voting rights at 14 years. Used to be 5 years. Gotta wait longer because the immigrants are voting for the wrong party, right? According to the Federalists in power. So you're going to make it harder for immigrants to be voters. You're going to have to wait longer. Yes, yeah, go ahead and pull it up. Yeah, there you go. The ulterior motive is because the immigrants lean Democratic Republican. And then you have, right on the nose, the Alien Acts. The Alien Acts, the president has the authority, and this is like without trial, no habeas corpus. The president may deport or jail foreign nationals, foreign citizens, people who are not American citizens, that he believes to be a threat. The threat really isn't identified, right? The threat could be that, well, that he might vote for the wrong guy. Or the threat may be he's writing these essays criticizing John Adams as president, making me look bad. That's a threat. The Sedition Acts. The Sedition Acts made it illegal for newspaper editors to criticize the president or Congress. Illegal to criticize the president or Congress. Now, what is the problem with the Alien and Sedition Acts?
Trying to silence people.
Yes. And how does this, I mean, thinking of the Constitution, what are we running up against?
A violation.
Yeah, freedom of speech, freedom of the press.
They really,
I mean, this was, and everybody knew what this was for. Everybody knew that the president was not as popular as he wanted to be, and this was his way of dealing with it. And that is why John Adams is going to be a one-termer. Of course, the Alien Sedition Acts were an epic fail. They violate two parts of the Constitution, states' rights, but also freedom of the press. And folks told Adams that this was a bad idea, but Adams was rather arrogant, and he thought that he knew what was best. He kept on, going back to remember, I'm the guy who wanted independence from England. That was me. We wouldn't be here without me. I'm that guy. You see, I'm the good guy.
sure.
Yeah. I'm like, well, dude, that was like 20 years ago now. Things have changed. So, now what's going to happen? And of course, the Democratic Republicans, they know that they are the target of these acts, and they're just not going to sit by and take this line down. They are going to do something about it, and that something becomes known as the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Both of these Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were written by Virginians, namely Jefferson and his good friend James Madison. This is 1898, And, we'll go ahead and watch the video explainer, and then we'll go back to the notes. So let me go ahead and click on that. Is this an Aflac movie? I'm gonna watch maybe. Okay, that was fun.
War. Critics argued that the real purpose of these acts was to suppress dissent of those criticizing President Adams' foreign policy towards England and France, especially the Democratic Republicans. They also argued the Sedition Act violated the First Amendment, freedom of speech, to the U.S. Constitution. Needless to say, the Alien and Sedition Act provoked widespread anger and would call into question the power of the federal and state governments. This issue also raised questions as to what is the proper balance between liberty and security, or the balance between liberty and order in the nation. Supporters of the Alien and Sedition Acts argued that because our security was threatened due to it being a time of war, well, at least a quasi-war, that it was necessary to reduce the liberties of people to protect the country as a whole. Not everyone was buying this argument, though. In response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were written. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions sought to oppose federal laws that Democratic Republicans felt were unconstitutional. The Kentucky resolution, written by Thomas Jefferson, and the Virginia resolution, written by James Madison, said a state could nullify federal laws passed by Congress the states felt were unconstitutional. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions argued that the state governments had the power to decide whether or not an act of Congress was constitutional. Now, this power is stated nowhere in the Constitution, but the 10th Amendment does state that the powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states or the people. Remember, Jefferson and Madison are members of the Democratic Republicans, who were advocates for state rights. The idea behind nullification was this: the Alien and Sedition Acts were federal laws passed by Congress. Since in the minds of many Americans, the Sedition Act violated the First Amendment to the Constitution, states such as Kentucky and Virginia could choose to nullify, cancel, ignore, or just not obey that federal law the states felt was unconstitutional. Since these states felt the federal government exceeded its delegated powers, the states were not bound to follow the act of the federal government. Now, this whole situation will calm down by 1800, since the Democratic Republican Party will take control of Congress. And as a result, Federalists will not be able to.
Alright, we're gonna stop there because that gets a little bit farther ahead than I want it to go. But I do want to take a look at this, because this actually is going to be a reoccurring theme in American history. Oh, I'm sorry. So this idea that in times where we particularly are at war, and technically we were not at war in the quasi-war, but American interests were being attacked, so you could call that war, that sometimes we have to give up a little bit of liberty to make sure we have security. And this happens over and over again. We have a new Alien Sedition Act passed during World War I. In World War II, we imprisoned Americans because we thought they might be a threat. With no trial, no habeas corpus, no evidence, nothing they did wrong. They just happened to be, their granddad was from Japan. And they're going to spend the next 4 years in a prison camp for security. So this reoccurs, this idea of giving up liberty to have some security. And Benjamin Franklin has a great quote about this. He says, anybody who wants to give up liberty in order to obtain security deserves neither. And that's a paraphrase. But you should look at the quote. It's a good quote. All right, going back to this. All right, so the compact theory. First of all, the compact theory, and this is what these nullification papers or the Kentucky, Virginia resolutions rest upon. This idea that the Constitution is a compact. Compact in this context means agreement. It's a contract or an agreement between the states. The states are willing to, the states come together to form the federal government. And if the federal government really isn't working for them, then the states come back out. This is going to be one of the big themes of the American Civil War, right? So this is the first time we actually see this being brought up, this idea of compact theory. And what these resolutions say, because the resolution is just, you know, a statement of what you believe. Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolution, Madison wrote the Virginia Resolution, and they both say that states do not have to follow laws they deem unconstitutional. So individual states can kind of pick and choose what U.S. laws they want to follow or not. And this becomes the idea of nullification. They can nullify a law that they do not think follows the Constitution. So yeah, nullification. So the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions is all about states nullifying federal law, and it was prompted by the Alien Sedition Acts. Thomas Jefferson will write to a friend, and these are some strong words. A little patience, and we shall see the reign of witches pass over. Their spells dissolve, and the people recovering their true spirit, or their true sight, restore their government to its true principles. So he's like, these federalists won't be around forever. We'll take the country back. And they do. In the next election, you got a rematch. Federalist John Adams versus Democratic Republican Jefferson. And you can see there is more widespread support for the Democratic Republican Party up in Pennsylvania and in New York. That is something that the Democratic Republicans did not have last time. But this becomes known as the Revolution of 1800. George Washington, who didn't have a party, but John Adams was his vice president, so, whenever John Adams takes over, people saw it as a continuation of the Washington stuff.
But it wasn't like that.
Yeah. So you had the Federalists, but now we're switching to the Democratic Republicans. And this was an ugly election. We're going to look at a couple of the attacks from this election. They're pretty fun. We think elections are ugly now, and they are, but they were ugly back then too.
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera.
Some political watchers are saying this could be the nastiest, most negative election season of all time. This campaign season seems like candidates have taken dirty to a whole new level.
When pundits start shouting and politicians start calling each other's names, it can seem like a return to civility is not possible. Like the very idea is a relic of some bygone era.
John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who wants to start a war with France. While he's not busy importing mistresses from Europe, he's trying to marry one of his sons to a daughter of King George. Haven't we had enough monarchy in America?
I'm Thomas Jefferson. I approve this message because John Adams is a hideous and hermaphroditical character with neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman.
If Thomas Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed. The soil will be soaked with blood and the nation black with crimes. Are you prepared to see your dwellings in flames? Female chastity violated? Children writhing on a pike?
I'm John Adams, and I approve this message because Jefferson is the son of a half-breed Indian squaw raised on hoe cakes, and Hamilton is a Creole bastard brat of a Scottish comment, madam.
The nastiest, most negative election.
Candidates have taken Drury to a whole new
It can
level.
seem like a
Alright, so those were the candidate's own words about the other guy. It was ugly. And,
Right away with
for
words.
years, like, for 15 years, Jefferson and Adams did not speak to each other because this campaign was so ugly and they called each other such ugly names, they just couldn't stand each other. But eventually, after they both retired from politics, they do start up the friendship again and exchange letters in the last years of their life. In fact, they die on the same day.
Oh.
And Jefferson's dying words were, "At least Adams survives." Meaning that he was glad that Adams was still going because he thought Adams was good for the country. And not only did they die on the same day, they died on exactly the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, that's funny.
It was
Well,
July
not funny,
4th,
not wrong.
what would it be, 1826? Yeah. Fun little fact of history. So the Revolution of 1800, it is whenever we see this shift in political power from the Federalist Party to the Democratic Republican Party. And it was a revolution because it was a change, right? Revolution just kind of means a change and things kind of come around. And it was peaceful. There was no stop the steal, right? There's nobody storming the Capitol building with Viking helmets and anything like that. It was a peaceful transition of power, and that kind of set the stage for every other presidential handover for a while. And Congress had a revolution as well. So the blue is the Federalist Party. So in 1798, you see so many Federalists, but the election of 1800, the Republicans take over in Congress. So that's the Senate, sorry. So you got a huge majority of Federalists in the Senate in 98, in 1800, you got a majority of Republicans, and the same thing in the House. Do you see a switch from the Democrats, Democratic Republicans, taking over from the Federalists? Let's take a look at this, and then, I forgot what this one was, we'll see if it's worth anything.
I, Quasi, hereby welcome you to the nation of Hydro.
Yeah.
Today we're going to take a look at the Revolution of 1800.
Do we recognize this guy?
The way we
He's if you watch the Jobs video,
And
that's
if
the
you
Jobs.
clicked on this video and you were thinking, man, I can't wait to learn about some revolution, one thing you need to keep in mind is the fact that it was not an actual revolution. There are not going to be any crazy epic battles like we had during the American Revolution at Bunker Hill. There's not going to be any heads chopped off as we saw during the French Revolution. In fact, this revolution, quote unquote, was not an actual revolution. Now, before you click exit, it was a significant moment for the young nation. It's extremely important that you understand why. And keep in mind, in the early period in our history, we had two political parties, the Federalists versus the Democratic Republican. And these two political parties were forming throughout the 1790s under the administrations of George Washington.
Alright, I don't think we need to listen to Mr. Jocks. Okay, there we have it. Let's see, I want to go here. And here. Alright, so Hamilton versus Jefferson. Alright, I'm gonna hand this out to you. And that's all that we're going to be doing with notes today. I'm going to give you two pieces of paper. One is what's linked up here, and then the other one is the paper on which you're going to do all the work.